You are listening to The Catholic Wire.
Hello and welcome to The Christian Mother. I am Wendy Haught, your host for today's episode titled Embracing the Vocation of Motherhood. Father Zepeda and Mrs. Lisa Davis are my guests today. Father and Mrs. Davis, thank you for joining me to discuss this critical topic of women opting for careers outside the home. It's so odd the way everyone sees the problems that women leaving the home and children has created, but rarely do they look to the root cause. So I'm excited to hear your perspectives on defining the problem and how we can promote solutions. Before we get started, though, Father, would you give us a little of your background, and then we'll hear from Mrs. Davis about her experience.
Sure. I'm a priest from Mexico. I was ordained recently, actually, just 6 months ago, perhaps. And, as I was preparing for this podcast, we were preparing for this podcast, and Mrs. Hott has known about this for a while, Mrs. Davis as well. And, something that someone told me when I told them about the idea, they looked at me with a sort of a glance and they said, "You're going to tell mothers how to raise their children?" And I was like, no. So I kind of feel like I need to give an explanation, like I need to excuse myself. Certainly not. I know that the vocation to motherhood is very special. I know that really you need experience to be able to give a good perspective on it. But there are two issues that, prompted me to do it. The first one is that there's not a lot of people that are doing an actual podcast devoted to mothers. And so that's why I'm trying to bring mothers into this and to work in this project. And the other one is that as a priest, you do get some experience that is related to that in two ways. The first one, because as a priest, of course, you had a family, and in some cases, in my case, for example, I actually had the care of children, of young teenagers, and that gives you some experience. And the other one, and I think this is very important, is the fact that you learn the principles from the church, the principles that apply to everyone's life. And you deal with many, many families. That's such a huge experience where you are, staying with one family this day, staying with another family on this day. You hear of the problems of this one or of that one. And you see everyone dealing with their problems or with their challenges or coming up with great ideas. And you can kind of bring all that together. Now, I'm still young in a certain way in the matter that I have been ordained only recently, but I have seen a lot of families. I don't pretend to be an expert on this topic. I pretend to be a person of goodwill. And if anyone has ideas, corrections, or whatever, just let me know. But that's our idea. We want to help moms to do their beautiful job.
That's a great point about all the experience you have as a priest working with families. And I did want to point out that even though Father said I'm new to the priesthood, he is 37, so has a mature voice, not just somebody. He's not just. I'm not putting down young priest, of course, but I'm just saying he has had more experience than just a newly ordained priest. So. And Father, you didn't mention your time at the Carmelites.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's true. I was 8 years in a Carmelite monastery, and that's quite a learning process too in regards to the family life. I used to say that when you're married, when people are married and they talk to priests, they say, "Well, you don't know what it's like to be married." And the truth is, when you're in a monastery, you're married to 8 or 9 people. You have to deal with all of their temperaments and all their difficulties, and you live with them all the time. And there's nothing to make that softer. So, yeah, you get a lot of experience from that too.
Right. Mrs. Davis?
Hello there, Mrs. Hott. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to hear your voice.
And you wanted my background?
Yes, I want to hear all your lovely stories about married life. I mean, how long you've been married, how many children, what they're doing now, what you're doing now.
Well, let's see. We've been married 33 years, going on, well, no, 34 years. We've been married 34 years. You lose track after about 25. We have 10 children. And let's see, out of the 10, we had 4 boys, then 4 girls, then 2 boys hanging down there at the bottom. And right now we have Father Philip Marie is CMRI, is our number 3 son. And he's stationed, do you call that stationed, Father? He's serving a parish in Idaho and helping with the minor seminary there, St. Joseph's Minor Seminary. He's a teacher there. And then we have two daughters who are sisters for the CMD, the Congregation of Mater Dei here in, actually out of Iowa and Omaha. And Sister Antonia Marie is teaching school in Arizona at Our Lady of the Sun. And Sister Evangeline Marie is a white veil right now still. And we are expecting her to take the black veil. I think it was in February. And we have 2 boys at the bottom, Gabriel and William, who are in the minor seminary in Idaho. And at least one of those is talking very seriously about joining the major seminary when he graduates this coming year.
Fantastic.
So that's out of the 10. We were a homeschooling family. But not entirely a homeschooling family. We mostly homeschooled through high school for most of our children, and then several of them went to the school in Omaha for high school, or at least partially back and forth. So we have experience with conventional schooling too.
Right.
And we have, out of all of them, we have, how many married? We have, just say, 3 married sons and 2 married daughters so far, and 11 grandchildren.
I just have to say that you have ideal experience for this topic and so many other ones too. Well, okay. And I guess I should say a few words about myself. I'm been married 42 years. I have 2 grown children. And let me see. Oh, and I took care of my parents until they passed away. And so that's about it for me. I'm not as interesting as my guest. So thankfully you're going to hear a lot from them. So with that introduction out of the way, let's dive into this topic. The first question I have, Father, I'd like to ask you, what is the main hindrance? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm mixed up. I wanted to ask Mrs. Davis, since she has, daughters, what is the main hindrance for women today to embrace their vocation to motherhood?
Oh my. Well, the whole world is against you these days almost. I think it's actually a little better today in some ways, though. I really do think there's been a bit of a backlash. You do have, we have the how you reach that stage of rebellion against your parents. Well, my generation, it was assumed that you were going to college and you were going to have a career, and maybe if you decided to, you would eventually perhaps have children and throw them in daycare. Well, I think that this generation a lot of them are rebelling against that. And I think there are actually a little bit more receptive right now than they were when I was a young mother, 25, 30 years ago. But I still think that the biggest roadblock to my married daughters right now probably is the fact that everywhere around you in the world, you've got you've got big tech, you've got television, you've got social media. So many of our young people are involved in social media. And even if your own friend group are people like you who are trying to be good Catholic mothers, you're still inundated by the advertisement, the everything in the world around you tells you that it is not a career to be a mother, that it's a sideline, it's maybe a hobby to be a mother, and you aren't as revered, you aren't as respected as if you're a lawyer or a doctor or have something fancy to say that you are. When in fact, of course, you and I know it's really the opposite. Your chief vocation, the most important thing you do is motherhood. But it's still, the whole world tells you the opposite. It really does. I mean, you don't even have to have friends or be involved with someone personally that talks down motherhood. It's the world in general around you over the last, well, ever since women's liberation. What would that have been, the 70s, 60s and 70s?
Yeah, 60s, I think it was really starting.
Yeah.
I was telling Father that I was raised in the 60s and 70s, and I was completely sucked into that culture I had no idea. I didn't even realize that I was being affected that way. And it wasn't until I went through conversion in my mid-30s and started learning about the Catholic faith that I recognized what had happened to me and the ideas I had that weren't even really my own ideas. They were just accepted. I had just accepted them. But
yeah, you're like a boiled frog. You don't know what's happening to you. But
it's true.
Yeah, I think it's very true. It's very true. They don't even know it. It's just the world around them that expects a certain thing. And
even down to the magazines that were in the racks when you checked out at the grocery store. I mean, all the pictures, the covers and the headlines on those things all promoted this career womanism thing for the most part. And so...
Well, and you have to have a lot of courage to buck that. You have to have a commitment and a courage and a deep understanding of what you are doing and the importance of it. And I think it's extremely difficult to do that if you don't have faith, if you don't have especially the true faith, because everything is against you. And it does require a tremendous amount of courage, especially if you're a mother who's got her little children like ducklings following behind her, all 5 or 10 of them, and you're going someplace where you should not be accosted, but you are, places like the zoo. I remember one time we went to the history museum with all my little children in tow, and we're having a wonderful time. And I was embarrassed for the women and had to have a talk with my children afterward. There were 2 women that stopped us while we were waiting in line to see an exhibit, and very rudely asked me what was wrong with me, and didn't I know any better, and what right did I have to have that many children, and they were just rude.
Yikes.
Well, and it's crazy. I can't imagine doing that to somebody else. I can't imagine being that way, but there's a certain mindset in the world today. I think they have a certain amount of guilt. These were older women who would have probably been brought up in a time when that was not the norm, when, business women were not the norm and stay-at-home mothers were. Right. So I kind of wonder, maybe, you wonder if there's guilt going on with some people or what it is. I don't know. But today, the girls today still face that.
Yeah.
Right.
This has been going on. This campaign has been going on since for a long time. I mean, my parents used to tell me, back in the 60s, as you were saying, they had an advertisement campaign in Mexico going on, and the slogan was, "Let us make less of us."
Yeah.
Let's become less, and that was the point. Is try to have 2 children and no more.
Right. Yeah. Depopulation is kind of a big problem today. I think that's behind a lot of problems in this world, and what's crazy things that are going on.
Yeah, I would say that for the problem when it comes to embracing the vocation to motherhood, there is 2 ways in which that can be done. I think not embracing your vocation, and one would be actually not having children at all, which is the one we've been talking about. But there's another one, and that's when you have children and you don't want to take care of them. And as Mrs. Davis was saying, now we see more of a trend, more people that are willing to have babies, to have children. But it's like, as you said, throw them into daycare. And I was listening to this, preparing for this kind of projects. I was listening to a certain podcast, and I might put the clip here later on, where this woman is talking to a person that, she has a business. She's very successful, and she wanted to have children. And she had a baby, and she says it bluntly. She says, right out, I had my baby and I was with him for a couple months, but then I realized I wasn't as happy when I was with him as when I was at work. So I decided to just put him in daycare, and you know, that's better for both of us because he has a good time in daycare and I have a better time at work.
I spent days with him in the beginning and I was just like, oh, I need a break. I need a break. And I found it not enjoyable looking after him. So I knew that going back to work was the best for us. And
I was just boggled out of my mind. I'm like thinking, are you saying that in the radio? You know, he's going to grow up to listen to that.
Right.
Oh, goodness.
Also
awful.
selfish. It's just selfish.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, from my perspective as a priest, those obstacles come from three sources, you know, the devil, the world, and the flesh. You have the flesh. When would it be the flesh? You know, you have, for example, as a woman, you realize that it's more comfortable not to have children. You realize that perhaps you don't want to get married, which is the case with some people. And so there is a part of you, as Mrs. Davis was saying, where it's selfishness, and that's just a hindrance. You have the world that we talked about, you know, the whole propaganda that you hear in movies, in radio, in all kinds of stuff. In movies, it's amazing how they put messages so hidden, even from, you know, children movies. And the devil, you know, the devil that brings temptations and that basically moves you to want to step away from what is actually the highest vocation you could have. I was surprised listening. I was listening to one of the. So I was listening to one of the, watching one part of a very famous movie, one of the superhero movies, and one guy actually says, you know, there is as many as Catholic bunnies or something like that. So, you know, making fun of the Catholic doctrine of having children. So you have those three hindrances that it's a big obstacle. And as Mrs. Davis was saying, you do need to be very brave to overcome those obstacles.
Yeah.
Right. And there's so much emphasis on superficial things like your looks. I mean, it's important to, you know, stay healthy and be as attractive as you can. But there is, I mean, growing up, I always heard, well, you don't want to have a lot of children because that will ruin your figure. And being the worldly person that I was very concerned about that. I mean, keeping the figure and all that kind of thing. And so there's pressures, like we said earlier, there's pressures all around to not have children. And
well, to have the goodies too.
yes.
I mean, it's to make have the fancy vacations, to have the nice car and the fancy house. And if you have 10 or 12 children, you're probably not going to have those things. The trade-off is wonderful, but most people don't understand that.
Right.
I would rather have my 10 children over a fancy house and fancy vacations, but try explaining that to, you know, some young woman coming out of college and expecting to, you know, take the world by the tail and be rich and have the car. I mean, it's a very hard thing to compete against what they see and hear is the goal. The chief goal of all people should be to be rich and, you know, have fancy vacations, I guess.
Right.
And like you said, and the, you know, the figure and the clothes and the, but they're not usually happy. I don't think they will admit it, but I don't think they're really happy.
Well, I mean, I was totally there. I can't say that I was worried about having the best vacations or whatever, but I had no concept of all the good things from large families. And it wasn't until, you know, after my conversion, and then it was a long time before I started going to the traditional Mass. And once I got to the traditional Mass, and I'm exposed to all these large families with 10, 12 children, and I was totally taken aback because I had all these preconceived notions that if you have a lot of children, then you're going to be unhappy because your life is going to be a struggle. And people that have a lot of children, obviously, you know, I'm not saying that I knew this, you know, consciously, but unconsciously, I had these ideas that, well, they're not as educated or something, you know. And also, I thought that you would just be worn out all the time and the children would be a real drain. And what I saw was, and this was a complete revelation to me, was that the large families, the kids were looking out for each other. And it wasn't the parents. The parents weren't, you know, having to take care of them every minute. It was like at Mass, I would see one older kid with one younger kid, and, you know, all the way down the line, and they were helping each other behave and say prayers and everything. So, I mean, that's when my light bulb went off. I'm like, oh, I was so wrong about all of this, about large families and motherhood. So there you go. There's my big confession.
Well, you know, I have to add something to that. It's a beautiful thing that, and I had written a blog post years ago now, actually, about big families, and had a snide comment about somebody that it was what a terrible thing. It's almost child abuse that you make your older children take care of your younger children, and which is the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life. Because right out of my 10 children, my oldest son, Paul, I was there shortly after his first baby was born, our beautiful Gavin. I have only 2 grandsons. The rest are all granddaughters. So our very first grandchild, and Paul, I was there immediately after the birth, and the nurse had the baby over, had the babies born, and they take the baby over to the little, bassinet, and they're taking all of their vital signs. And she asked Paul, "Do you want to change the baby's?" No, I don't even think she asked him. He asked her. He said, "Well, I'll change his diaper. I'll put a diaper on," and no biggie deals. I mean, the oldest of 10 children, he pretty much knew everything there was to know, and the nurses were just amazed at how experienced he already was. Well, of course he was. And that's true for my oldest daughter, Michelle. She's got 4 children now, and she calls mom a lot and just says, "So what do you think about this?" But she nobody had to teach her. She already knew what to do. Now here's the really cool thing, though, and this is what I'm just learning, and I love it. So this summer, we have our youngest 2 sons here. My number 4 son and his wife and 2 daughters are now living with us on our property. They renovated the top floor of our house, so they live with us. So I have grandbabies. Oh, I'm doing the toddler thing again.
How lovely.
Oh, it's a whole different thing when you're 56 than it is when you're 26, let me tell you. But that's a whole other conversation. But the beautiful thing is that, okay, my youngest 2 sons, you would think would not be getting the experience taking care of babies. Well, yeah, they do. If you have it goes around in a big, beautiful circle. So, the oldest children's children the youngest children learn to take care of babies, and are experience life with toddlers through the oldest, their nephews and nieces. So it's just big. I think that's what God had in mind. Nobody goes out into the world unprepared. That's how I think it really is supposed to be.
Yes, it's an apprenticeship.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That's such an important point. It's totally true. And I've realized that too, because it's like you see many parents that don't know what they're doing. And it's very sad, like they come in and you have like classes for parenthood and things like that. And it took me a while to realize that, because I don't come from a big family. And when I started here in America, precisely seeing, these big families when they have a lot of children, and it hit me what Mrs. Davis is saying. This is a school. That's how it's supposed to be. They come out and they know what they're doing. And a lot of the evils that we see in society is because we have been lacking this, because you have had so many parents go out there untrained, and they don't know how to discipline their children when they're young. They don't know how to make them obey, and they have all these wrong ideas about parenthood. And so that's why we see so many teenagers right now totally out of their radar. They have no discipline, no nothing, because their parents didn't know what they were doing, because they came from small families, family of 1 or a family of 2. And I noticed that in myself. My parents, they wanted to have more children. They couldn't. They only had 4. And with me, my mother wasn't able to have any more children. And yes, you see that. You lack that experience, because in a big family, you would get it. That's such a good point to make.
Right. Well, and there are a lot of families that can't have more than one or two, and that's God's will too. But I think that one of the things we have lost in our generation is the fact that everybody moves away from their family, and sometimes that, I mean, I'm the one to talk. My children are all over the world, from Germany to Idaho to Minnesota, but I think that there's a lot to be said for keeping that network that our great, maybe our grandparents, but definitely our great grandparents had, with the cousins, the aunts, the uncles. I mean, there was always somebody you could ask counsel of or an opinion of, and that's not valued today. And I think it's lost. It was an important thing that we have lost.
Yes,
so true. I'm in the same boat where our daughter is living in Canada and our son is in Texas, and so we're all spread out. But also, just in general, Americans have, like you said, we've lost those connections. We don't value them. And I realized this, it really hit me when, I guess it was Holy Week, when I was talking to the Austrian seminarians, and somehow the topic came up about Americans moving, and they were so shocked at at how easily and how quickly, how happily Americans move. I mean, we just pick up and go, and they said that is totally not done in Austria. They just, like I said, they were shocked, and that was very enlightening to me. And since then, I've seen this discussed several times, and I thought I need to get this book or whatever on rootlessness. I mean, because yes, it's a thing, and we are, and it doesn't work well for families and keeping kids connected to their roots, and having that extra help with raising them. So. Yeah.
Now, I would say, if you're going to move to one of my parishes, just you feel free to move, but just bring your whole family.
That's good advice, Father.
Yeah, I can't say anything because I was a Navy brat, and I think we moved in my entire life about 29 times. So I'm one of those. But I think I think there's a backward sort of a thing about that too. We're so happy we live here in Omaha because we're right here at the, what would you call this, the meeting ground. Almost everybody, who's a traditional Catholic passes through here eventually. So we see our sisters, we see our priests, we see, our children come up here for, different camps. And so we see everybody eventually, but except for my German son, someday we'll see him again. But eventually, I think that, one of the things that it is in a backward sort of a way, and I have to actually say this, that it teaches you not to value things of this earth so much when you're not so tied to one location. There is that. I think that all of my children have learned that it's not the place, it's the people. And maybe because we have moved so much, they are all extraordinarily close to one another, because home is your family and not a specific place. So I think that when you talk about roots, I mean, there's roots and there's roots. You know what I mean? I think the most important roots are the ones that are buried in your faith, and then your family and your faith are almost inextricable from each other, that the roots are so intertwined with one another that you would never think of abandoning your faith any more than your family, or your family any more than your faith, because all of your happiest memories and the most important things in your life were intertwined with those two things. And it's not about a place. It's like, the way the Protestants took the churches in England, but it wasn't the church. It wasn't the place. It was the faith. It was the real thing, where the roots really were. Right. So I think that it's important to make those roots with your children and understand that many of them, just for job purposes, end up moving far away. And we have actually kind of a blessing in the internet. We have our ability to connect now better than our grandparents would have, at least. But yeah.
And actually, going back to our original question, that is, I mean, if the the wife, the mother, is staying home with the children and raising them, then you are a one-income family, and you probably will have to move more often, because it's gotten to the point now where it's very hard to get raises if you stay at the same job. I mean, you have to change jobs just about to get raises. So that's contributing to that issue as well. Any other final thoughts on the problems or the things that are encouraging women to leave their children?
Not for my part. I think I think it will come back. A lot of the things in this shows are going to be coming back every now and then.
Okay. Well, let's move on. Father, I wanted to ask you first, is it wrong for a woman to pursue a career in the world as a businesswoman, or?
No, not necessarily. It needs to be understood properly. You know, one of the things that happens a lot, especially in traditional circles, and I hope I don't get in trouble for this answer, is that people tend to do definite, absolute answers. They tend to say, yes, it's definitely wrong for everyone, or the opposite, no, it's definitely right for everyone, and that would be the side of the world. And the thing is, there are different circumstances, different perspectives, and what you need to understand, or what we need to understand, are the principles behind this. So the role of a woman, the role that properly belongs to most women, is the role of the family. A woman is really, all in her nature is made to help other people, to assist other people, to be more sensitive, to be the heart of a family. There are women, I've met women that are very good at business. But what it's important to understand is, I think, two things that I would like to impress on whoever's listening. The first one is that a business career is not going to be really the most fulfilling thing. A lot of people think that the family is not going to be fulfilling, but the business will be fulfilling. And that's not the case. I was listening to something that Jordan Peterson was saying. He was talking to this lady, and the lady was very upset because she said, I've been lied to. I've been working for so many years, and I realized this wasn't what would fill my life. And then Jordan Peterson says to her, what were you thinking?
And it was like she woke up in her late 30s and thought, well, the first thing she thought was, this profession of mine is actually nowhere near as comprehensively fulfilling as the advertisements claimed, which is something that virtually everyone discovers as they move forward in their professional career. The reason that you get paid generally for your work is because you're doing something that you wouldn't choose to do if you weren't being paid for it. And so the idea that your career is going to be the fundamental source of your fulfillment is true for a very tiny minority of people. And even with them, it's complicated. So she was tearful and upset about the fact that it took her so long to discover that there were other important dimensions to life, and that motherhood turns out to be, well, how many things do you do in your life that are fundamental, right?
I mean, if they're paying you to do something, that means that it's not good. It means that you have to pay someone to do it. So it's not something that's going to fulfill your life. And there's only a few things that are going to fill your life. And, one of them is God, of course. Another one is the family. Mm-hmm. And so it's important for women to understand, yes, I mean, there's nothing wrong necessarily in being a businesswoman, but it's not the best, actually. The most fulfilling thing you could have ever is a family, if that's your vocation. The other thing that is important to understand is that most of the times that leads to, being a businesswoman leads to not very good results. I have a story that I wanted to bring up, and it's kind of a sad story. I won't say the name of the lady. She's pretty famous, but she appeared in a magazine in Bloomberg about 4 years ago. And the headline was, "Freeze your ex, free your career." This woman was very successful in the business. She was single. She was blonde. She spoke fluent Italian, and she was working for several companies. So she was doing very good at business, but she wanted to be a mother as well. And she tried that fertility procedure where you freeze your eggs and supposedly you're able to later on do the procedure to be pregnant with your own eggs. Now, the sad thing with her is she did that. She paid $19,000, and her plan was, I'm gonna meet Mr. Perfect, and I'm gonna marry him, and then I'll use my eggs and I'll get pregnant. Sadly, she was in the business. She lived her own life, and she never met Mr. Perfect. She turned 45, and she decided, well, this is the moment where I need to use this. So they did the process. She had 11 eggs, and she tried each and every one of them, and some of them didn't survive the process of thawing. Some of them failed to survive. Others didn't get fertilized. She had some of them that were left, but some of them seemed normal. So she turned 45, and she didn't find Mr. Right, and she decided to start a family of her own. And she unfroze the eggs, but none of them worked. Some of them didn't survive the thawing process. Others didn't get fertilized. That left only 6 of them, and some of them seemed to be abnormal. I'm not even going into all the morals behind this. There's a lot of problems here when you speak about morality. But the sad thing is, even just looking at it from the natural side, all of her plans got ruined. And she says herself, when she realized that all her plans had failed, these are her words. She screamed like a wild animal, throwing books, papers, her laptop, and collapsing to the ground. She says, it was one of the worst days of my life. There were so many emotions. I was sad. I was angry. I was ashamed. I questioned, why me? What did I do wrong? So this is not an isolated story. There's a lot of women out there that go into the job, go into the business career, and then 10, 15 years later, they find out my life is empty. Because truly what fills us the most is human company. We're designed to be in a family. And so that's very important to understand. The last thing I would mention about this point is just this. It has to be one or the other. There's nothing wrong with being a businesswoman, but if you really are going to do that for, seriously, then you won't be able to have a family. And that's what I think is very important for women to understand. The idea of being a person that is, in a 8-hour job and having children at the same time, not going to work. One of them is going to fail. One of them is, you're not going to be doing your duty in one of them. So I think it's very important to make a decision and to make the right decision, to figure out what is your vocation, what is God calling you to do. In most cases, really, it might be having a family. In other cases, it might be a religious vocation. In a very, very few cases, it might be pursuing a professional career. But then that is a sacrifice. If you do that, you won't be able to take care of a family, at least not in the right way.
That's true. And one of the things they don't seem to consider is that they freeze these eggs and, okay, maybe they are successful with a pregnancy and they have a baby or more than one baby, but then they don't have a husband. I mean, not all cases. Obviously, there are some married women who do this, but there's plenty of them who are pursuing this style of motherhood, freezing eggs and waiting until later, and then they don't find their Mr. Perfect, as she said, and then they decide to go ahead and have children, and the children have no father. So
well, there are so
sad.
many problems of morality in this. I mean, it's like you consider the eggs that are dying, the ones that you discard, and their lives, their human lives. There is even the process itself is immoral. It's something that the church would not allow, because it's something that you're doing against nature. So yeah, I mean, the whole process is just out of the order that God provided. Right.
And just last week, I listened to a podcast by, you mentioned Jordan Peterson. His daughter has a podcast, Michaela Peterson, and she did one on freezing eggs. And the expert fertility doctor that she was interviewing said that they collect the eggs, and then when they're fertilized, they do genetic testing on them, and they discard any one that's not perfect. So, yes, there's a lot of moral issues in it, and most people don't realize, I don't think, when they support this idea.
Yeah.
So I think that, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to make a comment about the idea that so many, marriage is not important anymore either. And there's so much part of that that's a part of this discussion,
Right.
that there are many women in today. I mean, like you had said earlier, you watch so many movies where it's just accepted that you live together, you don't get married, you even have kids, you don't get married. It's not a committed relationship, and it's a mess out there. But I think a big part of embracing our motherhood is embracing our marriage as well. If you aren't part of a team, this is a very, very hard job for one person. And it occasionally happens that you are forced to be if you're a widow, say, for instance, but I cannot conceive of raising a family without the support of your husband. It's unbelievable to me that anybody can do it and remain sane. But it's part of our society too, that
Right.
whole, problem that marriage is not really considered a necessary and even a natural part of a family, that you start with a husband and wife legally married, properly married, and then comes the family and the motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yes, it's a big package. The problems, and I mean, they just cascade from, issues like this. It's one on top of the other, and I think that's why there's so much confusion. For one thing, is because we don't identify the root problems and say, okay, this is this right here. This is all these things are going to come from this, and it's going to be, really difficult. But anyway, so thank you, Father, for clearing that up. I agree that we tend to hear a lot of it's this way or nothing, this way or you're wrong. And there are, different things for different situations. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
across the board, but
Just-
on the whole, women are designed by God to be mothers and nurturers. And many women find out after they do what the world has been telling them, they find out that they weren't happy doing that, and they find true happiness and contentment at home.
Yeah.
With their
Just to
children.
back this up a little bit, because someone might say, "Oh, Father is a modernist." It's interesting. Leo the 13th, he dealt with this question,
Mhm.
and he said that women should not work in things that are unbecoming to them. That's one of the principles that there should be. You can have women working in some things that are very prone to their, or very fitting for them. For example, being a nurse or things like that, and not necessarily. I mean, even big jobs. Even something that's interesting is I had a boss who was a woman, and she was very good at her job, very, very good. And here's the funny thing: she was mother-like. When she was a boss, but she was kind of like your mom. So it's like, it's just natural there. And a point that Leo the 13th brought up was that the way God designed things was to safeguard the dignity of women. Home, your environment at home is designed to safeguard your dignity. And you see that lost. There's so many complaints right now about women being abused, or that in the workplace, they don't respect them. And that's kind of what Leo the 13th was saying. He was saying, that's why God designed things in such a way. In the home, you are protected. In the home, your dignity is protected. Out there in the job place, that's not possible. And it's important to know the principles. I think it's very important to know the principles behind it.
Yes, and there's the whole other issue of, the Industrial Revolution, because women often did work with their husbands before that, in the home, the home economy. And so that way they could, work outside, do other things that they were interested in. But then they also were training the children, so that there was a family business. So those, there's all kinds of different ways to look at it and
Yeah,
see that there are options for, if you have some creative ability that you want to express, there are ways to do it and still stay home. And you don't have to go out and work for a corporation.
Yes, the idea, the concept of a mother that is staying at home doing nothing is also wrong.
Yes.
Or not doing nothing, but I mean just limiting herself to the children, and that's not being limited at all either. But what I'm saying is, like, being a mother, taking care of the children, that doesn't mean that you don't have stuff to do or even projects of your own. I remember my mother, she would go out and start business, staying at home, but she would do stuff. And when you look at the Bible, the Bible, in the praise that that the Bible does of the perfect woman, one of the things that they mention repeatedly is that she is doing business. She's figuring out ways to grow the money, their patrimony.
Right.
And so that's very true. Also, as a mom, even as a housewife, your life is not limited. There is a lot of potential on stuff that you can do, and at the same time take care of your family.
Yes. As my children got older, it was funny how even it didn't matter what stage they had gotten to, I would have people come and say, oh, well, now they're this old, you can go get a job. It was like, it never ends. Like, no one could ever be satisfied that I chose to stay home. Your children are going to college now. Now you can get a job. And I was like, oh, well, now I'm finding all these other things that I can help my parents and do charity work and things like that. And so at every stage of the game, there's a new way to express yourself as a mom at home. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was tremendously rewarding. And I just wanted to say that for the moms out there who may be getting that same pressure to leave home, don't do it. It's wonderful having women at home, even after their children are grown.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's when you get your chance to help the church. Mm-hmm. That's when every time I think to myself, well, I could bring a little extra money and get a part-time job somewhere. And every time I think that thought, God sends the sisters after me.
I know. Right. Absolutely.
And I have a new project.
And now we're on podcasting.
Right?
So, yes. Well, Father, what about the supernatural perspective of being a mother?
Well, this is the beautiful thing about it. I had a sermon about this a couple months ago, and I got really excited about it. I was very fiery, at least it seemed to me, inside in my heart, because it's I don't know how I came across outside, but it's such a huge deal to be a mother. I remember one time I was talking to the high school girls about this. And, when you think about all the perspective of it, all the possibilities that come from it, all the responsibilities that you have, what you'd really do in the world, for starters, your own sanctification. You both know, if you have been a mom, you know that it requires a little bit of a saint to be a mom if you want to be a good mom. And this will come back in future shows as well, but I experienced this myself. I remember when I was taking care of the kids, there is every now and then you get this moment where you go to your room and you see the bed and you go like, time for my nap. Yes, finally. And you're just starting to sleep, and then something happens, you hear a noise, or you get that. I don't know if anyone gets this. I used to get this. I get my spider sense, just, like, for anyone who knows comics, they know what that means. What that means. I get this thing in my head telling me something's wrong. They're doing something right now. You got to go there right now. I was like, oh, no, I was just about to fall asleep. Come on. And you go there, and yes, they were doing something wrong, and you get them. If you are a dedicated mother or father, you'll realize that it takes practice of virtue. And these virtues that you have to practice every day actually make you the model that you needed to be. It makes you what God had in mind. And that's how God perfects you, that, through this vocation. That's one side of it. The other side is also the children that you have. A lot of the reason why women go into business is because they say, I want to make a difference in the world. And, I'll give an example. Who knows the name of the CEO of YouTube? Nobody does. She's a woman. I mean, yes, the people that are related to the business know her, but other than that, nobody cares. And when I'm not trying to be mean to her, just putting an example. But if this person dies and she doesn't have a family, no one cares. Someone else takes the job, someone else takes the money, and that was your part in the world. When you're a mother, it's like a chain that is never going to end, as Mrs. Davis was implying. You're a mother and you have children, but then those children are going to have children, and then those children are going to have more, and you were the root of all those things. If you did a good job, all that's going to go down for generations and generations, and you'll be rewarded, so to speak. I mean, that will be the fruit of your labor. You can be the beginning of something really, really good happening in society because you created a good family from where a lot of other families came, and vice versa. If you were a bad mother, if you didn't do your job as a mother, that's going to go on for generations and generations and generations. And so there is such a huge responsibility to it, and actually such a big change in the world. If there were only good mothers in the world, or let's say that but what I'm saying is good mothers would change the world, not businesswomen, not even the priests. This is going to sound really bad, but it's true. If the priest is doing all his job, but the mothers are not doing their job, our job gets lost. Not all of it, of course, we can do a lot of stuff as well, but we need the mothers because they are the ones that actually have the children all of the time. I hope this is understood correctly.
Yeah, but there's a quote: "The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world."
That's right. Yes. I was just fixing to say it.
Yep.
And it's very true. And so that's a huge thing.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I think there's the idea, you touched on the idea of being perfect mothers or not perfect mothers. And I think a lot of mothers worry that, they're not being the perfect mother, right? And there's only one perfect mother, of course. But yes. I think that the perfect mother is the one who's trying to do the will of God for her family. And I think if that's your bottom line, you are the perfect mother. If you are doing everything you can to do the will of God. And there is, like you said, there is no more important job on earth. So, of course, God's going to be jumping to help. And the Blessed Mother, good gracious, if you haven't been consecrated to the Blessed Virgin Mary already as a mom, you go do that because we need her like big time. But yeah. I wrote down a quote. Can I read this quote real quick? And I wonder if you hadn't already thought of this yourselves too, from Joseph Cardinal Minzenzi.
Mm-hmm.
This is my favorite quote. This is the quote that is on the inside of a notebook right next to my bedside table that for years I would just pick up and read occasionally when I needed it. Okay, mm-hmm. This is my go-to quote. The most important person on earth is a mother. She cannot claim the honor of having built Notre Dame Cathedral. She need not. She has built something more magnificent than any cathedral, a dwelling for an immortal soul, the tiny perfection of her baby's body. The angels have not been blessed with such a grace. They cannot share in God's creative miracle to bring new saints to heaven. Only a human mother can. Mothers are closer to God the Creator than any other creature. And God joins forces with mothers in performing this act of creation. What on God's good earth is more glorious than this, to be a mother?
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's the most important job. You got to kind of remind yourself of that sometimes when you're doing
right.
when you're doing the mom thing.
I know. I know. I still look back and think, oh, I was such a horrible mother. I made this mistake and that mistake, and it's really hard to do, but it is so worth doing. And
since Mrs. Sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to say, as far as the supernatural perspective, one of the things that I had to overcome was the culture teaching me to think about me all the time. And having children, being married, that took care of that. We talk about dying to self all the time as part of being Catholic, and having children helps you do that because you have to put their needs first. And I'm so thankful that I was able to overcome my blindness about that. And so that's all. I just wanted to add that.
I would say something with what Mrs. Davis commented there, and it's something we actually wanted to say, is that, you know, the perfect mother or not perfect mother, that's true. No one is really, and no one is a perfect nothing really. As a priest, you kind of see the same thing. As a priest, you see yourself, and then you go like, oh, I can't believe I did that. You know, I should have done differently. But our purpose, you know, when we do this show, is certainly, we were talking about this before we recorded. We don't pretend to be perfect here and telling people, oh, this is what you're supposed to do. We're actually in the journey as well, you know, and part of the interest why we have, at least I do, when we are doing these podcasts, is that we are learning in the process. You know, this is a good reminder for us. It's a good way to tell us, hey, you're supposed to, you know, do this, or, you know, be better at that. As a mother, yes, what Mrs. Davis was saying, we do our best. You know, we try our best. And as long as we're trying to please God and we do what our conscience tells us and what God, you know, kind of hints at us to do, things will work out. Something that I will just throw out there really quickly is that your children have a will of their own. They have free will. And sometimes you can't change that. But God will take care of it, and he will take into account your efforts. And sometimes the graces that you don't see happening maybe in your lifetime will happen either at their deathbed or after your lifetime. But the work of a mother and your efforts are always rewarded. There is always fruit to it, even if you don't get to see it.
Yes, that's very encouraging, Father. Thank you. Well, it looks like we're about at the end of our program for today. I want to ask if either of you have anything you want to add to wrap this up.
I guess I'll go first. I would just say, don't be afraid of the sacrifice that it takes to be a mother. Don't be afraid of the vocation either. It's a very beautiful sacrifice, a very fulfilling vocation to have. As you were saying, you know, it's true. You forget about yourself and then you start living with others. And I was saying in a marriage talk I gave recently, each life that comes into your family, each soul that comes into your family, it's such a world. It's a whole new world. And it brings such a new thing to your family. You know, it's like a family where you have only the mother and the husband and no children, forget about it, unless that's God's will. If there is a case where you have few children, and again, if that's God's will, God will provide. But the truth is that every child that comes to your family is a whole universe. And you got to take into account what Mrs. Davis was saying too. The value of that person is almost infinite because it's a person that can belong to God and can possess God for eternity. So it's a huge thing. It's something that has a lot of possibilities. Don't be afraid of that vocation. Embrace it and trust that it's not going to be as hard as you think. Actually, it's going to be much, much better and more rewarding than you would even expect.
Yes. Mrs. Davis?
I don't think I can add to that. It's a hard job. It's a hard job. It is really a hard job. I mean, any mom out there is not going to try to downplay the fact that there are a lot of sleepless nights. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of it's just constant. It's just constant. There is most jobs you get to come home at 5 o'clock. There is no going home at 5 o'clock for moms, and that's a wonderful thing too in a way. I mean, you are so immersed in this job, but it is the most important job that there ever was. If you're trying to do it by yourself, you're going to have trouble. You need to dedicate yourself to the Blessed Virgin Mary. You really do, and don't find excuses to miss the Rosary because everything that you need is there with her, and she will help you. If there's no way that I could have mothered without the Blessed Mother all those years. I don't know how Protestants do it because she's our bestest friend, and she understands. I mean, you know what one of my favorite mysteries of the Rosary is? No. It's the fourth joyful mystery, the finding of our Lord in the temple. Mm-hmm. No, fifth joyful mystery. Because, it gives you a lot of hope knowing that even the Blessed Mother and Saint Joseph lost a kid.
Yes.
But they found him. Yeah, don't try to do it. Don't try to do it by yourself. You really do need that all the heavenly help that you can apply to. Don't be shy about it, and make sure your children know that you do. You know, when you're praying with them and for them, let them know that you are praying with them and for them. It's an important thing for children to know that. And then I am counting so much on my children praying for me now. I cannot tell you, but
Yes.
yeah, I don't have I can't really add to what Father said, though. He's absolutely right.
Yes. And what he reminded me of the idea that I've read about so many different times, but you never know which child is going to be the one that solves some huge problem for the world. I mean, like, so many children were like the 14th child or the 20th child or whatever, and they did
Right.
this fabulous thing. And here we are stopping at 1 or 2 or
Right.
not having them at all. And we're just denying God the opportunity to help us solve all kinds of problems, and bring so much joy into the world, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both. You have brought so much to this discussion. It's just been a delight for me as the host. I'm so happy that we were able to visit. I just want to thank everyone for listening to The Catholic Mother. We're under the patronage of Dear St. Anne. And if you have found the show interesting, please subscribe to our channels and share with your friends, both within and without the church. I'm Wendy Haught, and I thank you for listening to thecatholicwire.org.
Thank you for listening to The Catholic Wire. If you have found this show helpful, please say a prayer for all our collaborators. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels and share with your friends. For questions and comments, you may contact us at thecatholicwire.org.